We will go ahead and begin this webinar. I'm going to go and turn this over to the co-chair of the Committee on Gene Drive Research Recommendations for Responsible Conduct. Dr. Elizabeth Heitman from Vanderbilt University will open us up and introduce our speakers. So Liz, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning everybody and Happy New Year. We first off apologize for the technical glitches. There is another minor technical glitch on the main sheet here that today's discussion will be about building international capacity for research and technology assessment of gene drives, not necessarily looking at species interaction, which is what the line below it says. But we're going to be talking today about an issue that has come up in a couple of discussions, how to think about building capacity both within developed countries and in low and middle income countries for both the science and the oversight, the assessment of technologies related to gene drives. And we have two speakers today to address different dimensions of that. The first is Dr. Genya from the U.S. Department of State, who works with science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development and alleviation of poverty. And she is responsible for U.S. State Department's technical capacity through science policy fellowships and is interested in thinking about how to increase the scientific assessment capacity of partners with the United States. And then Dr. Clifford Goodman is a longtime technology assessment and health policy researcher and analyst in the private sector. He works as senior vice president at the Lewin Group outside of Washington, D.C. He has done work for over 25 years in the area of, and I've got reverb now. I think if everyone can mute themselves, thank you, that's better. Has worked in the area of technology assessment and developing capacity for technology assessment, particularly in healthcare, and has advised a wide number of both U.S. governmental, non-governmental, and non-U.S. organizations on questions of policymaking and appropriate technology assessment in healthcare. So I believe we're going to start with Dr. Dana, assuming the technology is working. And again, we will take comments and questions from the committee at the end of the formal remarks from our panelists. We regret that this is not an open discussion for people who are not on the committee, but we will be taking questions and comments. If at the end you have a question or a comment, either just speak up or raise your hand on the electronic hand-raising panel, and I will try to keep an eye on that. Or you can send a chat message to me or to Keegan and make sure that we recognize that you have a question. So, Dr. Dana, if you can get your slides posted.
I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak today about some of the international policy perspectives around emerging biotechnology tools and techniques and ideas around research capacity building. And you may be wondering a little bit about why the State Department cares about topics such as gene drives. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is in a sort of a larger context around new biotech tools and techniques, gene drives being one specific application of those. And for the State Department, there are three main reasons that we are interested in emerging tech issues. In my office, the Office of the Science and Technology Advisor to Secretary Kerry, part of our job is to keep an eye on emerging tech trends that have international policy implications and to advise our senior leadership on such issues. And issues around biotechnology and the development of new tools and techniques such as gene drives have three sort of main areas of impact that resonate with our leadership. The first is on the trade and economics side of things and the approaches that our trading partners take to regulation and oversight of the products of genetic engineering is of great interest to us. The decisions that are made are critical to enabling trade and innovation to proceed. And we know that for things like gene editing and gene drive applications, that countries are in early stages of examining regulatory questions related to these developments. And regulatory transparency and predictability is very important in taking an idea from the lab to the market, and then also helping to determine who your best collaborators or research sites are. The second area that we are very interested in, particularly in my office, is that of scientific research and ensuring freedom of scientific research and getting the tools in the hands of those who are most interested in using them. So the new tools and techniques, such as the gene editing tools, along with other advances in genomics, are really bringing down the costs and the infrastructure that's necessary to conduct cutting-edge biological research. And we understand that these tools have the potential to innovate research processes internationally, and we want to make sure that we are keeping avenues open to scientists to get their hands on these tools and actually increase the opportunities by which international partners can work together on this. And then the third reason that resonates also with the State Department is the security implications of advances in biotechnology. The ability to drive a specific trait through a population immediately raises questions about how, if, or where this technology might be deployed. And from the security side, they will think often about, is it an intentional act that might cause some kind of harm, and then who would be responsible for this harm. So I'm going to preface the next couple of comments by saying that oftentimes gene drive discussions that I've been involved in or have heard about on the international fora, particularly within multilateral fora, often come up under the rubric of synthetic biology. And the United States doesn't see gene drives or gene editing as specifically the domain of synthetic biology, but we do realize that a lot of researchers who are using these tools do consider themselves synthetic biologists. But we also know that many others in research fields, not necessarily synthetic biology, are also picking up these tools. So there are a number of different multilateral fora that are picking up questions around gene drives and synthetic biology more generally. One is the Biological Weapons Convention, which I understand from my colleagues who work with this convention that they've had several presentations about advances in biotechnology and synthetic biology, and that gene drives were discussed specifically in an August 2015 meeting of experts for the BWC. And the presenters at this experts meeting brought to the attention of the parties to the convention where the technology is and policy and regulatory issues related to gene drives. And my colleagues who work with this convention say that gene drives and synthetic biology more generally will likely to continue to appear in papers and presentations in front of the BWC, and that there is a great deal of interest within the security community about these kinds of developments. We know that the OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has taken up the topic of synthetic biology generally, and there's a report that was released in 2014 on emerging policy issues in synthetic biology that considered a number of different issues around research infrastructure, intellectual property, governance, etc. Specifically about gene drives, we understand that there are projects a project under consideration by the OECD's new working party on biotechnology, nanotechnology, and converging technologies, or the BNCT. Another key international forum where I've heard gene drives come up, and again, this is in the context of synthetic biology, is in the Convention on Biological Diversity. And in this convention, there are 2 protocols, one of which deals with, or sub-agreements, one of which deals with the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, covering the transboundary movement of living modified organisms. Within the Convention on Biological Diversity, which I am the point person for the USG on synthetic biology within this convention, there have been some very difficult and lively negotiations and discussions about synthetic biology over the last 5 years or so. And there are a number of NGO organizations that are pushing hard for a precautionary approach to synthetic biology and technologies like gene drives, and they're calling for global regulatory oversight of synthetic biology organisms, components, and products, and they argue that existing measures are inadequate. Now, I will say that I learned most of my information in rooms like this. These are the smaller negotiating sessions where colleagues from around the world, policymakers and experts from around the world come together to discuss and negotiate text. And this is synthetic biology is one of those topics where the convention has produced a number of different decisions on it. And this has been going on for some time, and the most recent discussions within the convention regarding synthetic biology and gene drives happened in Montreal in September of 2015, where the convention actually formed an ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology, and a number of topics were discussed by this technical expert group. Gene drives were repeatedly raised as a particular risk of synthetic biology. During this technical expert group deliberation, there were concerns that organisms that were modified using gene drive technology could lead to invasive species or the escape of propagation of living modified organisms in the environment. Now, the United States doesn't necessarily see gene drives as synthetic biology, so we were vocal in saying that, like any new advance, gene drives can lead to products that should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis because the potential environmental and health risks will depend on the genetic material introduced, the organism, its background, what its intended use is, the human practices surrounding it. Now, there were 40 different representatives at this expert group in Montreal from 30 different countries and a variety of organizations. And in that mixture of people, there were some who thought that there were particular risks associated with many different kinds of applications of biotech tools. Again, I mentioned gene drives kept coming up. Others emphasized with regard to gene drives that there were a lot of benefits for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, helping to deal with disease vectors like that spread malaria, etc. So I would say from sitting in these rooms and engaging with representatives from around the world, there are a real spectrum of different perspectives on what's happening, and levels of knowledge about where the technology is, and different worldviews on how we should be tackling governance of biotechnology applications. Gene drives and XNA, or synthetic nucleotides, were mentioned as the most challenging for ecological risk assessment or risk assessment processes in general when it comes to looking at some of these new biotech tools. So that was a bit of the context or places where I've heard gene drives discussed in international multilateral fora. Now, there are a number of things that are happening more at a country level within the United States. In July of 2015, the White House issued a memo that set out steps to update our coordinated framework for the regulation of biotechnology. And in this memo, there are 3 main tasks: clarifying the current roles and responsibilities of the primary agencies that regulate the products of biotechnology. So that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Environmental Protection Agency, and Food and Drug Administration. The second task was to develop a long-term strategy to ensure that the federal regulatory system is well-equipped to assess any risks associated with future products of biotechnology. And then finally, they called for a horizon scanning exercise, which the National Academies is tasked with to ensure that regulatory agencies are prepared for future products of biotechnology before they reach the regulatory system. This could include products that are produced through the applications of gene drive technologies. I am speaking to one of the main groups who is looking into some of the policy and regulatory questions around gene drives, so I don't need to get into that. I will say that into the nature of this study, I will say that the scientific community who I've been engaging with has been pretty forward-thinking around safety issues. And there's a Science article that came out in 2015 that brought together gene drive researchers and risk assessment experts to talk about safety measures and recommending various confinement measures for safe laboratory practices using gene drives. I know that other countries, when I talk to my colleagues who are in the biotech space, I know that other countries are aware of this study by the National Academies, and that they're aware of articles like this in Science, and they're actually the UK and the Netherlands told me that they are drawing from the recommendations in the Science article to look at their biosafety processes, and that they're both watching the National Academies study carefully. Canadians have also told me roughly the same things. Now, the most activity that I have seen around policy, regulatory, risk assessment considerations for gene drives is coming from the United Kingdom and EU member states. The biotech regulatory officials that I've talked to within the EU have expressed some uncertainty about how current risk assessment methodologies will cover non-human gene drive applications, but that being said, they don't see EU biotechnology regulatory frameworks changing at all. Other places and other sources of information that I have seen in the international space and that inform the thinking that we're doing within my office about where the state of play is internationally it has been one of the places we've seen is the new report that was issued by the UK's House of Lords Science and Technology Committee, which had an inquiry into the possible uses of GM insect technologies and regulatory considerations. This report was released, I think, on December 17th, 2015. And there was quite a bit of discussion on gene drives as a GM technology with potential, and this was based on information submitted by leading UK scientists. And from my read of this report, there are a couple of points that we found particularly, or that I found particularly interesting. One was that the UK should host a field trial of GM insects to test fully the science behind GM insects, the regulatory policies and processes, and use this field trial process as a public engagement mechanism and a way to monitor the suitability of the regulatory environment for emerging technologies. For gene drive specifically, I read in the report that the research is required in order to allow effective post-release monitoring and tracking of this new generation of genetic modification, specifically referring to the fact that it enables the persistence of GMOs in the environment. As a side note, I wanted to point out also that the Netherlands is drafting a report on the extent of gene drive usage within Europe for their National Scientific Advisory Committee, and it's to be published in English. They have told me this month in January and shared broadly. I haven't seen that yet, but I wanted to mention that. In terms of other international thinking, the European Commission scientific committees issued 3 opinions around synthetic biology. The second opinion, which came out, I believe, in 2015, mid-May 2015, did some thinking on risk assessment using case studies of different types of biotech tools and technologies. From talking to folks in the EU on this, they indicated that gene editing systems, CRISPR-Cas9 systems, came onto the scene just months after the opinion was released, and so this may be the reason why gene drive applications were not considered as a case study when they looked at the adequacy of risk assessment methodology being used in the EU. Now, I just wanted to mention a study that I became aware of recently, which is Australia's Commonwealth Institute on Scientific and Industrial Research, or CSIRO. They were engaged by the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health to conduct an assessment of the potential environmental and human health risks associated with the escape of mosquitoes genetically modified to be male sterile by a homing endonuclease construct. So I know this committee has heard a lot about this kind of technology, and from the study team's knowledge, their analysis represents the first quantitative risk assessment for a precursor to a gene drive technology that's intended for use and release into the environment. So those are some of the conversations that I've been aware of, and there is a lot of that's been focused on the U.S., EU, UK, and then there's the rest of the world. So from talking to colleagues, particularly around these Convention on Biological Diversity processes, which is where a lot of what I learn comes from, and I know that other countries are aware of these kinds of applications of gene editing and gene drive technologies. We've had discussions with Canada, with Japan, with India, China, Mexico, and Brazil, and many European countries to find out if they're tracking these kinds of developments. And they are, but they're not necessarily actively pursuing active research in some of these technologies. And for other countries who are aware of the technology, they have expressed, for example, within this expert group under the Convention on Biological Diversity, initial opinions that their regulatory systems will be able to handle gene drive applications, because they expect that many of them are going to be considered living modified organisms under the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. I will say, in speaking with representatives who come to the convention, that in particular African countries are largely unaware of this technology, and it's unclear whether the capacity exists within countries to evaluate the environmental or human health risks of gene drive applications. And this is a disconnect that I find a bit concerning, because when I talk to researchers who are working on these technologies and people who are making, or institutions who are making investments in this technology, a lot of their focus seems to be on problems that are of significant interest and have significant impacts to countries, for example, within the African continent. So in our office, we've had a lot of discussion about capacity building and research partnerships around advanced biotechnology tools and techniques. And this is not necessarily to say that we're focused on increasing the capacity on gene drives per se, but a whole range of different tools. And the reason why we've been thinking a lot about this is because, as I just mentioned, a lot of the conversations that I've had with researchers have been about the problems that they want to solve that are significant for public health, food security, and energy challenges. And their capacity building within countries where these applications are envisioned, I think is very important, because from our perspective, it's important that those on the ground can participate in developing solutions to their own problems, and also that capacity is developed to evaluate, to bring up to speed regulators and scientific advisors who are going to have to evaluate field trials or applications for field trials or environmental releases of GM technologies, such as those containing gene drive applications. So we have been trying to figure out ways to build capacity writ large and to try to partner up researchers who are very interested in the applications of gene drive technologies, in particular synthetic biology, emerging advanced biotech tools more generally. And it's been a real challenge. We have been watching the International Genetically Engineered Machines competition to see, who is picking up these tools and whether there are, is that a place for more research collaborations. It's for us anyway, a barometer of which countries are picking up these concepts and these tools. And there are a lot of iGEM teams from around the world who are picking up tools like the CRISPR-Cas9 systems. But again, with the iGEM competition, we largely see African institutions in particular missing from this competition. And I've talked to U.S. institutions who supply research tools like CRISPR kits to researchers, and they can tell me across many different countries, who is receiving their kits, but they have very little penetration into African countries and relationships with African scientists. They're actively expressing interest in building those strategies. They're looking to the State Department and the larger community, research community, to help them do that. But again, it's a challenge. So our office is also in discussion with the National Science Foundation, the U.S. National Science Foundation, on the possibility of strengthening linkages between their Office of International Science and Engineering and the various divisions that are funding biological engineering research. And there are there's several different NSF divisions that may fund gene drive research as part of the funding streams that they have available for biological engineering. The Division of Molecular and Cellular Biosciences, their Systems and Synthetic Biology cluster, the Division of Chemical Bioengineering, Environmental and Transport Systems. They have a biotechnology and biochemical engineering program. The Division of Environmental Biology has programming in evolution and ecology. We are starting to explore with the Office of International Science and Engineering how to bring their international funding mechanisms into conversations with some of these different divisions. There are mechanisms for funding for international workshops, international supplements to domestic awards, or co-funding of regular awards with directorates that have interest in including international angles in their programming. So I want to say that we are starting those conversations. I get questions from researchers in the U.S. at least about, how can I incorporate, where can I get money for international collaboration? And so this is the genesis or the impetus for our office to try to get some answers to those questions and maybe spur this along a little bit more. The National Science Foundation has participated in synthetic biology programming under the EU Framework Program 7 as an observing partner. They're in discussions about possible Horizon 2020 work, although that is not at all confirmed. And then they also are, again, this is within the rubric of synthetic biology, but they have mentioned that there is a possibility of gene drive proposals or research happening in these areas. They have the Directorate for Biological Sciences at the NSF and the UK Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, or BBSRC, have a pilot research program that includes a synthetic biology program. I understand applications were accepted for that pilot research program in September 2015, and that awards or applicants will be notified in March of 2016 as to the results of that. It's not clear what exactly will be funded by that, but we will definitely be keeping our eye on that space to see how gene editing and gene drive research may be, if there are funds made available for that. There's also, in August of 2015, the National Science Foundation and the U.S., Israel, Binational Science Foundation signed an MOU on research cooperation and systems in synthetic biology is an area of research supported with proposals that were accepted through November 2015. So again, we will be watching that space as well. The final thing that I will say about some of the other conversations that we started in terms of building capacity around new biotech tools and techniques is that we're in discussions with our agencies who are running fellowship and scientist-to-scientist exchange programs to see if there can be portions of these programs that are devoted to building more collaborations or bringing more scientists over to the U.S. and partnering them with cutting-edge biotech research institutions. Now, I will say that in conversations with the folks who I know who are working on gene drive applications, these are not necessarily the same folks that you would, or that many in the biotech research space are traditionally aware of. So this is a very multidisciplinary group of folks in terms of computer scientists, biochemists, systems biologists. They're not agronomists. They're not ag scientists per se. So they're not necessarily aware of some of the already established institutions that are out there, such as the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research or biotech institutions such as the Nigerian National Biotechnology Development Agency. So it's not to say that the opportunities are not there, it's just that the community of researchers that I have engaged with is not necessarily aware of the other parts of the biotech research community in some of the countries that they're really interested in working with. And I bring up African countries just because of the lack of programs there and the desire that I have heard from African experts and researchers in some of these international conversations to build that capacity and to make those connections. So we in our office are very interested in how to continue to foster collaboration. We're open to ideas and thoughts and suggestions. The Science and Technology Advisor to Secretary Kerry and I are going to travel to West Africa in March of 2016 for the next Einstein Forum, which is in Dakar, Senegal. And we are working with our embassies to highlight research partnership options around biotech when we meet with scientists and policymakers and research institutions there. We anticipate going to a couple of different countries in West Africa. So again, our doors are open to ideas and we really are interested in trying to facilitate more collaborations, particularly in that part of the world. With that, I will close and thank you very much.